Welcome to Transforming Transformational, a Teach Beyond podcast. I'm Kian.
And I'm Heather. We're here to explore what it means to be transformed in our own lives and how that overflows to living lives of transformational impact in our communities.
Today is Good Friday, and so we want to use this opportunity to look specifically at Christ's death and resurrection, our salvation and hope, and how this is the heart of missions.
We're joined today by Justin Schell, who recently authored the book, The Mission of God and the Witness of the Church. We're talking together about how God is a God on mission and how we, as his body, can witness his goodness, his sacrifice, and the hope of the gospel.
Justin is the director of Younger Leaders Generation for the Lausanne Movement and is also a lecturer at Union School of Theology. Justin holds degrees in mission and biblical theology from Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary and in business administration from EDHEC Business School.
Justin and his family live in Tulsa, Oklahoma, in the United States.
Let's go over to that conversation with Justin now.
Welcome to the podcast, Justin.
Heather, thanks so much for having me on. I'm excited to be with you guys.
Hi, Justin. We are so excited for you to join us and for the conversation we're about to have. And as we get started, I know that you've lived overseas in the past and have also worked in missions in various capacities over the years. Can you tell us a little bit about how you first got involved with missions and maybe a quick overview of the roles you've played?
Yeah, for sure. I became a believer early on in college, and like 2 weeks later, heard a speaker share about God's heart for the nations. And he just, spent 45 minutes walking from Genesis to Revelation. And as a new believer, I thought, man, if the whole Bible's about that, if that's what God is doing, then I guess I need to be a part of it. I call it holy naivete. It's where you obey before you understand that you should talk yourself out of being obedient. That's something that we teach ourselves later on, unfortunately. So, and then a couple weeks after that, heard a stat that changed my life. I heard that 2% of our missionaries were going to the Muslim world at the time. And it's not much higher now, but I just remember, again, I didn't know who Muhammad was. I didn't know the 5 pillars of Islam, but just said, Lord, if no one else is planning on going to that part of the world, I'm going to go that way. I'm going to head that way. You can redirect and you can shut doors and all those things, but I'm going to move that way. And that started a journey, which included being on staff with a ministry called the Traveling Team, traveling the U.S., speaking on campuses, helping hopefully ignite mission passion in university students. It included some time at seminary and a part of a church plant in Salem, Massachusetts. And then my wife, and at this time our son, Henry, left for the mission field. We thought we'd be in North Africa, in Morocco long term. Our plan was, bury us in the Sahara Desert after we're done, but wanted to see Christ made known there. Morocco still, there's maybe about 2,000 known believers, 99-point-something% Muslim. And so those are some of the things both that got me into mission and directed some of the steps. And then in 2013, coming off the field, joined staff with the Lausanne movement. And I now serve as the director of Younger Leaders Generation, or YL Gen, for Lausanne, helping kind of oversee you could say the leadership development arm of Lausanne.
That's interesting. I love the holy naivete. I think so many people we talk to, they say, hey, if they knew that like this was what their life was going to look like, they might not have made that first step. But you sign up for 1 year, 2 years, and all of a sudden, a lifetime later, you have quite the story you've lived. As we talk about you then coming off the field and now working with Lausanne, and now you're providing resources. You're writing. You're an author. And I know what we're talking about isn't your first book, but what caused you to write this book, The Mission of God and the Witness of the Church? What caused you to write this book now? Why is this the book that we need now?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's a part of a series of books that Crossways published called The Short Studies in Biblical Theology. And it's the journey to write started with me reaching out to the series editors saying, hey, who's going to do the mission volume? They had a volume on covenant and a volume on kingdom. And I'm like, surely someone's going to do a mission volume. And they said, we don't have one planned. Are you asking because you're interested? And my initial response was, no, I'm not asking for that. But then a few months later, it just kept coming to mind of
Mm,
um, this. It's a book that needs written, and I think it needs written and it needs explored because mission is one of those things in ministry and in Christianity that so easily can become about other things than maybe about God. And so
mm,
when people speak on missions, they might just speak completely on the lostness of humanity, which is important, but it's not. I don't think the place to start when we think about God's mission. Or they might talk about the whole cosmos. You know, Jesus didn't just die for people; he died to redeem the whole cosmos. Uh, but I think if we start there again, we miss the bigger picture of what God is doing. And so biblical theology is great because it makes you well, it makes you follow the agenda of the Bible, right? So it's using the language of the Bible, it's following the storyline of the Bible. And so I think as I've taught what I hoped it would do, and as I've started to talk with people about it, what I think it's doing is it's bringing us back to what has God communicated about his mission. Your organization, my organization, we have different emphases, we have different interests, passions, but if all of them aren't flowing out of what God has said his mission is and aligning in the way we do that and go about it, then we're wasting our time or we're causing more trouble maybe. So I think that's what I'm hearing from people is you know mission had for them become so much about sociology and contextualization and how do you communicate just so that you know the gospel can do this and forgetting, oh wait, this is something God has been planning since before the creation of the world, and it's his mission first. It's not you in your little context first, it's his mission first. And so getting it all rooted back into his mission and building off of that, I think has been important for people.
yeah, yeah. We talk about partnering with what God's already doing in a place or in a specific work that there's nothing we can come up with or any place that we can go that God's not already at work in that. We don't start with a blank slate. We start with what the Holy Spirit's already doing. I'm
Mhm.
wondering when you describe what the mission of God is, you're talking about, God's on mission. How do you say that succinctly? How do you describe that? Because
Mm.
obviously we've got a whole book here now. But
Yeah,
what would you say is the mission of God?
yeah, yeah. It's actually a good question. I think some listeners may think, well, do we really need to redefine mission? But the word mission is it's. I think in the ESV it shows up 3 times, and it's not what we mean by mission.
Mm,
And so we're using this word mission to try to capture a concept that the Bible talks about again and again. So I think it's really important to ask it. I've defined in the book that the mission of God is God's revelation. So it's something He's doing, Him sharing Himself, He revealing Himself, His revelation for the purpose. So the purpose of His mission is for divine human communion.
mm,
So He's revealing Himself so that people might know Him,
mm,
might come into a relationship with Him. Revelation for communion in creation. We're not bodiless. For some reason, the Lord saw fit to create a world that is the backdrop or the stage for this drama of redemption
mm,
that's taking place. And so it's the mission of God is Him revealing Himself to humanity so that we might know Him in the world that He's made. And so then the question becomes, well, what role do we play in that? If that's the mission of God, what might be the
mhm,
mission of the church? And I define it as witness,
mm,
that we witness to God's revelation. We point to, we speak to, we bear testimony of what God has revealed about Himself. And we can do that in actions. In some ways, our actions reveal something about God. sometimes they're not super clear, because the way that the Lord has primarily revealed Himself is through words, and so our witness to God also, there's a very word centered focus to it, you could say. So it is words and deeds,
Mm,
revealing God. They go really well together,
mhm,
right? Um, but then, and that's our role as the church. We're witnessing to the God who has made Himself known.
mm, mm. Yeah, it's such a good picture of how our role is in direct response to or flows out of the fact that God is a God on mission. Then our role is witnessing that. And, today being
Hmm.
Good Friday, it brings to mind then, like, what is our role in light of what we remember on Good Friday, and then of course on Easter paired with that. So how does Good Friday shape our understanding of that God on mission, God's mission in the world?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I would probably want to take us to John 12. Jesus is getting ready for the cross. The disciples may not be aware of that, even though He's told them a few times. But something amazing happens in John 12. These Greeks show up and they want to speak with Jesus. And so the nations are starting to hear and they're starting to come and want to meet with Jesus. And in verse 23, John 12, verse 23, Je- Jesus hears about this and He answers, "The hour has come for the Son of Man to be glorified." All through John's gospel, we read, um, "It's not my hour." He says that to his mom at the wedding in Cana. "It's not my hour. Now, it's not the time. It's not the hour. It's not time yet." But then once the nations start to move towards Him in John 12, Jesus says, "The hour has come for the Son of Man to be glorified." And we might read that, and maybe the disciples heard that and thought, "Oh, wow, I wonder what He's going to do now, right? What's going to happen?" We just saw Him transfigured. Peter may be thinking, me, James, and John just saw Him transfigured. Is this going to be even better? Oh my goodness! Now the hour has come for the Son of Man to be glorified. Very next verse, very next words. "Truly, truly, I say to you, unless a grain of wheat falls into the earth and dies, it remains alone. But if it dies, it bears much fruit." So when Jesus says, "Now is the time, the hour has come for the Son of Man to be glorified," He means the cross. He means His death. And so we've got to ask, well, what is God's glory? What's it mean to be glorified? And the words biblically mean, glory means the substance, the weight, the essence. And so if you want to see the glory of God, if you want to see what God is really like, His deep down, His godness, His glory, His essence, what He's like, Jesus is telling us, look to the cross. Look at what I'm about to do. And even a few verses later, um, He says in verse 31, "Now is the judgment of this world. Now will the ruler of this world be cast out." So God will be glorified now, and the ruler of this world will be cast out. Those are big missional ideas, and they're going to happen now. But how does, even verse 32, how does He define His defeat over the enemy? Verse 32, "And I, when I'm lifted up from the earth," and He's talking there not about His ascension, but about the cross, "I will draw all people to myself." Verse 33, He said this to show by what kind of death He was going to die. You want to see, Jesus says, you want to see the glory of God? You want to see the defeat of evil? Look at the cross. Go to Good Friday, look at the cross, and that's where God most clearly reveals who He is, so that, as He says here, when He's lifted up, He will draw all people to Himself. So that's revelation for communion. That's God's mission. And I mean, um, the cross is ground zero for the mission of God.
Yeah. As we think through the mission of God and the cross and how that's the pinnacle of it, how do we connect to that? How does the church connect to that as we think about what that might mean to then go out and witness in a broken world, in a world that is full of kind of suffering and despair.
Yeah, yeah. Again, I'd probably take you to to scripture and see how the early church talked about this and did this. So I might go to a place like Second Corinthians. You know, Paul is writing to the Corinthians. This is a letter defending his apostleship, right? Why do you have the right to represent Jesus, to be his ambassador, his witness, even his apostle? And in the whole letter, he's describing his sufferings. These are the things that are my credentials. It's not that we have letters of endorsement. You are my letter. The fact that you Corinthians have come to know Jesus, are living for Jesus, my sufferings are proof, are a sign. And one place he captures this, I think, really beautifully, uh, but also I think, in a way that wakes us up and maybe will scare us in some good ways too. Chapter 2, 2 Corinthians 2, verse 14. But thanks be to God, who in Christ always leads us in triumphal procession. So, a triumphal procession was a Roman military parade where the conquering hero leads those he's conquered. And so, Christ is leading us in triumphal procession. We are the conquered ones. And it says, and through us spreads the fragrance of the knowledge of him everywhere. In the triumphal procession, those conquered would go and be sacrificed to the gods in the case of the Greeks. And there would be fragrance. That was an offering to Zeus, for instance. In this case, Christ leads us in triumphal procession, right? By his death, resurrection, ascension. He's leading us. And now, as our lives are on the altar, think maybe Romans 12, through us, through our sacrifice, that fragrance and the knowledge of him is spreading everywhere. And so our suffering isn't a hindrance to the gospel going forward. Paul says it's actually the way it goes forward. It is a life of self-denial, a life of uh, raising up King Jesus, the victor, through and me recognizing I'm not the victor, he's the victor. And and that life of maybe truly deep suffering, maybe just continuing to deny myself daily, that is how the fragrance is going to spread. And Paul's going to say in Second Corinthians, those that smell it, some it's a fragrance of death. They're going to turn away. They're going to reject your message. But for some who are being saved, it will be the fragrance of life. God will use your fragrance, your sacrificed life, to bring men and women to know him and to join the procession. So it's it we there is no Christian ministry that isn't cross-shaped. There's no such thing as true Christian ministry that's not a dying to ourself so that Christ might live through us.
You know, Justin, it strikes me that sacrifice is not our natural uh desire. So what you're describing is like, yes, we want that to be submitted fully, sacrificing ourselves, that living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God, as our act of worship, and yet that doesn't come naturally to us. So I'm
Yeah.
curious I'm curious how we can practically posture ourselves in a way that remembers the death and resurrection of Christ, and that we live in that sacrificial posture, that we would be daily taking up our cross.
Two things come to mind. Um, One is theological and then leads to the other one, hopefully being doxological. If we don't read the Bible and see what it says about ministry and about our union with Christ and how that means we are united with him in his death, we go down with him, but we're assured that we will rise with him. He is the head, we are the body. Wherever the head goes, the body follows. It's like a baby coming out. If the head is out, we know the rest of the body is going to follow. We're promised where Christ has gone, we will be. I go to prepare a place for you. If I didn't, I wouldn't say it, but I have, and I will come for you again. And so, understanding that the life of the Christian is I have a friend he's a lot smarter than me, so he talks about theology in math terms. And so he says he uses the idea of a parabola, which is shaped kind of like a
Mm.
U.
Mm-hmm.
It starts at the top left and it goes dips down, and then it goes up to the top right. It's kind of like the opposite of a bell curve.
Mm-hmm.
And he says that's the Christian life. That's what we're called to. And the up the other side and over, that's what we wait for. That's why the New Testament talks so much about our hope in his appearing, that we will be glorified. We will be like him, for we will see him as he is. And so theologically, if we're not digging in and understanding what Jesus and the apostles are trying to teach us about ministry in these last days, we're going to be set up for our suffering becoming a stumbling block instead of something that we can actually be grateful for, like the disciples in Acts 4:5. They left praising the Lord that they had been counted worthy to suffer with him. Oh, how do you get there? So I think one of the ways you get there is by listening to the New Testament on what the Christian life looks like, the cruciform life. I think the other one, and maybe we'll talk more about this in a moment, but um, we will not. Richard Sibbes, one of my favorite Puritans, said, "What will we do for him if we will not feast with him?" He said, "We will not suffer for him if we will not feast with him. We will not. We can only serve the master so long if we don't actually enjoy him." And so fostering, developing a heart that delights in God, that that can say about Jesus, he is the chief among 10,000s. He is altogether lovely. That's how we feel about him. We won't suffer with him. And so Sibbs would say, well, what do you do then? He would say, open your mouth wide and receive from him. So feast with him, believe his promises, grow to enjoy him, delight in him. So I think that's what I would say off the cuff, that we've got to understand that this life we're still living between the ages, an overlap of the ages, and there's suffering in this season. But, oh man, he is delightful. He is lovely. He is good. And that, I guess to wrap up that thought, is a friend of mine said, don't pray for perseverance, pray for joy, because you're going to persevere in anything that you have joy in. And so, are we joying in Christ?
Let's take a short break from our conversation with Justin on this Good Friday to read from Isaiah 53.
Who has believed what he has heard from us, and to whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed? For he grew up before him like a young plant, and like a root out of dry ground. He had no form or majesty that we should look at him, and no beauty that we should desire him.
He was despised and rejected by men, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. And as one from whom men hide their faces, he was despised, and we esteemed him not. Surely he has borne our griefs and carried our sorrows, yet we esteemed him stricken, smitten by God, and afflicted.
But he was pierced for our transgressions, he was crushed for our iniquities. Upon him was the chastisement that brought us peace, and with his wounds we are healed. All we like sheep have gone astray, we have turned every one to his own way, and the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all.
He was oppressed, and he was afflicted, yet he opened not his mouth. Like a lamb that is led to the slaughter, and like a sheep that before its shearers is silent, so he opened not his mouth. By oppression and judgment he was taken away. And as for his generation, who considered that he was cut off out of the land of the living, stricken for the transgression of my people.
And they made his grave with the wicked, and with a rich man in his death, although he had done no violence. Yet there was no deceit in his mouth. Yet it was the will of the Lord to crush him. He has put him to grief. When his soul makes an offering for guilt, he shall see his offspring. He shall prolong his days. The will of the Lord shall prosper in his hand.
Out of the anguish of his soul he shall see and be satisfied. By his knowledge shall the righteous one, my servant, make many to be accounted righteous, and he shall bear their iniquities.
Therefore I will divide him a portion with the many, and he shall divide the spoil with the strong, because he poured out his soul to death, and was numbered with the transgressors. Yet he bore the sin of many, and makes intercession for the transgressors. As we think about Christ's suffering and then the call for Christians to have self-sacrifice, to live a hard life, how does Good Friday shape how we engage with communities who are suffering, different places that are suffering, who may or may not be Christians? How do we engage with across those kind of dynamics?
Yeah, well, if they are Christian, I'll just say briefly, we come alongside and we suffer with them. We grieve with those who are grieving. Um, we listen to their suffering. If they're not, we can still grieve with those who are grieving. I think we can still do that for sure. Um, one of the ways we witness to God and to His revelation is by witnessing to His ways and the ways of the kingdom. And so one of the things we will do, I mean, we do this not just in a community that's suffering, say under a dictatorship or something like that, that's against Christianity, but even with friends who are suffering, we come alongside and we speak to them what is reality, ultimate reality. So that this sickness is momentary, that this oppression, God is using it for His glory and for the good of men and women, that this abuse at the hands of maybe government officials or family members who are against Christ, that it is storing up for us an eternal weight of glory. And so we weep with them, but we also want them to understand ultimate reality. Paul will talk about these momentary and light afflictions, and uh, we've got to help disciple people to a place where they can call their sufferings momentary and light, even though in the eyes of the world they're massive.
Mhm.
Uh,
And Justin, I note your tone here is gentle and patient too, and you know, it seems like that matters too. That it's
mm,
not like hurry up and get over this suffering because God's
right.
using it, right? There's
Yeah.
even as you're saying we can help each
Mm,
other to remember what is true in the midst of
yeah.
suffering. We do
Mm,
so with a patience and
yeah.
a gravity to what that actually means, right?
Yeah.
And that it's not to rush towards everything's fine
Yeah.
or to put a bow on it, right?
Just suck it up. God's being glorified. Yeah.
Right, right. That's not what you're saying.
No. 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 Thanks for for saying that. I think of John 11 when Jesus is speaking to the sisters there of Lazarus. Um, he has a theological conversation with Martha about the resurrection. I am the resurrection and the life. I know my brother will rise in the resurrection. I am the resurrection. That's a theological conversation. But then with Mary, you know, she says the same thing to him. If you'd been here, my brother wouldn't have died. But with her, it's not a theological conversation. It's where have you laid him? And then he goes and he weeps with her at the tomb. And it's both but sometimes it's one of those in the moment. But it's helping them see how this isn't what we're experiencing right now, that is an ultimate reality. Um, but also suffering with them, weeping with them, being patient, being patient.
Justin, so as you described how we engage with suffering communities, what can we as Christians also learn from the global church that maybe has more suffering in their local context than we're familiar with in the West?
Well, I think one of the things we can learn is that this life um, isn't ultimate. As I was sort of saying earlier, that that the things that we have valued in the West, for instance, and that are valued all over the world, comfort, for instance, comfort, wealth, aren't what is most precious in the world. Um, in fact, Jesus is, and so he is worth our suffering. He's worth the price we pay to follow him. I, I, I think that one of the things that impresses me about our brothers and sisters in multiple places in the world today is um, historically, when you see persecution, if you study church history, you as you read, you just wonder, will the church survive? Right? Will the church in North Africa survive as Islam sweeps through? Will the church survive in parts of Europe as as um, the Diocletian persecution breaks out, or Nero is on the throne? Will they survive? But what we're seeing today is in many parts of the world, the church not only surviving under significant persecution, but actually growing and intentionally pursuing missional movements in the context of persecution. So it's probably easiest to see in China, where the Chinese government today it's getting harder and harder for a season through maybe the late 90s through say 2015. Restrictions on Christians seem to be relaxing a little bit more and more, whereas now they're tightening down. But even in this season, the church in China is working together, saying this is just one network, saying we want to send 20,000 missionaries by the year 2030, just from our house church network. They're under persecution, but they're not battening down the hatches, kind of retreating into a ghetto. They're saying, no, this is the context that in which the gospel needs to go forth. You're seeing this in places like Nigeria as well, where not I believe it was 90% of martyrs in the last 2 or 3 years are Nigerian, mostly in the northern part of the country because of the persecution of groups like Boko Haram. There was a Nigerian brother at the Lausanne Congress in September who showed up, sat at his table. Everyone was in small groups around tables at the Congress. And an American pastor sitting next to him, it says, well, what found out he was a preacher. He said, what'd you preach on this weekend or last weekend? And he started talking about what he preached on, but he also said, my best friend was murdered in his pulpit on Sunday in his church. And this American pastor just, what do you say? I mean, he's recounting this to me. What do I say? And all he could say was, well, how do you what how do you move forward? What do you do? And the Nigerian pastor, this brother, just said, by God's grace, we've just seen that when one pastor, one witness is murdered for Christ, that 5 step up to take his place. Um, that's I think that's revival. I mean, that's not just. Um, it's we sometimes say the blood of the martyrs is the seed of the church, but often in church history, the church dies out. It doesn't. It's not the seed. It's just blood. But in this case, we are seeing in places of persecution, Iran similarly, where the church is growing and being missional even in the midst of their suffering. And so well, how many lessons could we learn from that? Um, that Christ is worth everything, and that when things get hard, um, that's a time to be on mission. We can be confident calling the world to Jesus no matter what it costs because he's worth it. Um, there's a few things that come to mind.
What encouragement would you give, Justin, to someone who, as they're hearing this, they're thinking, wow, I'm so small. I feel inadequate to participate in God's mission. Like God's working through other people. There's these big things happening, or that feels so far away. What would you say to that person?
Yeah, I think I would say that if you feel insignificant, that you might finally be prepared to be someone that can witness to the all sufficient God.
Mm,
You might be qualified now.
mm,
When we look at the qualifications for entering the kingdom, of qualifications for serving Christ, I mean, Paul says, "Who is sufficient for these things?" And the assumed answer is none of us are, but God makes us sufficient. Um, and I think I would point back as well to Richard Sibb's this idea of we will not. What will we do for Christ if we will not feast with Him? Uh, I'm I've spent a lot of time in Luke 14 the last year and a half, and the parable of the great feast is there. This is Luke's version of it. And for the first time, really, I started to pay attention to the master servant relationship. If you're a missionary or supporting missionaries or thinking about being a missionary, you know this is that parable where we're told, go out to the highways and the hedges, go out and keep going further and further and compel them to come in. And so we know it as a missional parable. But one of the things that I'd never noticed was, I'll just say, the heart of the master in it. And so this master is preparing this feast. The people that are invited, they won't come. Um, and the parable really starts in verse 16. But when they say that, they all begin to make excuses, right? That I've married, I've got this yoke of oxen, and the servant in verse 21 comes and says that they made these excuses. It says the master of the house became angry. And I mean, imagine if you're angry, if people have just probably offended you greatly. I mean, one scholar says this is like declaring war. This kind of the response in this parable. Says he's angry. So what does he do in his anger? Go out quickly to the streets and lanes of the city and bring in the poor and the crippled and the blind and the lame. And I'm like, that's not. If I'm angry, maybe I'll try to resell the food, get back some of my money, or I'll just throw it away because I'm mad. Um, but his heart, the master's heart, is set on a feast. He's he's committed. And as you go in the parable, you find that um, uh, you know it, the servant actually says, "I've already done that." So I like this servant as well because the servant knows the heart of the master. I
Mm.
knew you would want me to do that. I knew you'd want the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind to be brought into your house because that's the kind of master you are. I knew that. So I've already done that. And the master says, well, then that's where we get the keep going out further. Go out to the highways and the hedges, go out further. And he says, um, and the master said, go out to the highways and hedges and compel people to come in that my house may be filled. That my house may be filled. His heart is a house filled with men and women feasting with him, joying with him. We find out in Matthew's version, this is a wedding feast, right? And so they're not just being invited to a party, they're invited to, and not just to attend the wedding, but to, we know, because we know the rest of the Bible, be in the wedding. And so I would say to someone who doesn't feel um, sufficient, or capable? Do you know how good the master is? Do you delight in him? And do you think that you could have a ministry of inviting people to a feast? And if so, that's what mission is. That's what the mission of the church is. Whatever capacity you think you need, whatever brilliance you think you need to develop or that you're missing, that's not what you need. You need to know the heart of the master, and then
Mhm.
with joy go out and invite men and women. Come, come and meet my master. He's so good. Couldn't you just see this servant evangelizing, right?
Mm.
Come,
Mm.
come, the feast is ready. My master's prepared it for you. Don't worry about what you're wearing. He'll clothe you with a white robe. He'll welcome you in to the feast. Don't be ashamed. Just come. If you only knew how good he was. That kind of evangelism is biblical evangelism. And so if you can do that, if you can spend your days allowing your heart to be warm in the sunlight of Jesus, and then go out and invite people to enjoy him with you, then you're ready. You're ready to be a missionary. Um, yeah, that's that's what I'd say.
Wow, Justin, thank you so much for sharing this picture of a God who is the master. The heart of the master is for people to come to the feast. And what an invitation and an opportunity as he calls us, his church, his bride, to invite others in and invite others to the table. I love that picture. Thank you so much for joining us for this conversation and for sharing all of this.
Yeah, it's my pleasure to be with you guys, and yeah, I hope it's a blessing to listeners.
Justin, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for being with us and having this conversation. One last thing before we let you go. Every week on the show, we like to ask our guests, what's one thing that's changing your life right now? So this can be something big or small, something heavier, like you can kind of take it where you want to go. So I'll go first. Need a little bit of time to think about it. The thing that's changing my life is riding bikes. And so this is not me riding bikes. This is my kids finally learning to ride bikes. And it has been very exciting. They've enjoyed it. It took some convincing and my brother actually being here and helping them along, but it's been great. So
Oh,
that's been changing my life.
that's so fun. That's great that he was able to be there for that moment too. So did they have training wheels first and now they're without training wheels, or how is that going?
They had training wheels, but that did not help us at all. So
Oh,
that was
just
like two
straight
years
to the
ago,
2.
2 years ago. And then it went to like, yeah, something totally different. Just, I think it was not me and my wife trying to help them. They needed somebody else to come along.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, that's great. Well, what's changing my life this week is the Microsoft Translator app. So just recently I was traveling internationally, and I don't know why I didn't already have this. Honestly, I think a lot of people who travel internationally already have an app that can live translate, but someone showed me, unfortunately, towards the end of the trip. So I'm ready for next time. But there's a function where you can have it so that you're just
Hmm.
talking and it's live translating for the person. So I used that in a
Yeah.
couple of stores and also during an event where there was a speaker in Spanish. And so to be able
Oh
to
wow.
kind of catch the gist, it's not perfect, but it's amazing to see how, AI powered tools like that are able to help us communicate. And
Hmm.
I love that. So what about you? What's changing your life lately, Justin?
Yeah, that's great. Maybe a non-serious one would be I've just discovered a new jazz radio station in Tulsa. And it is awesome. If you like big band, it's just amazing. But on a more meaningful note, often when I talk about the heart of the master, people will say, how can I start to see God more clearly that way? And I try to point them to some resources. And one that comes to mind, particularly about missions, is there's a book that is really good that I've been trying to get in everyone's hands called God Shines Forth. God Shines Forth by Dan Hames
Mm.
and Mike Reeves. Um, really good book on. They did a shortened version of it called "What Fuels the Mission of the Church," And so that's a shorter kind of 70 pages. And then the longer one's about 180 pages. And it's just looking at mission from essentially from the perspective of the goodness of God. And
Mm,
it's awesome. So for your listeners, I think
yeah,
that's what I would say is life changing.
nice. That's great. Well, thanks again, Justin, for this conversation. We really appreciate you joining us today.
Yeah, it's a privilege to be here.
Kian and I serve with an organization called Teach Beyond. Education plays a big role in missions, and Teach Beyond is a part of that.
As followers of Jesus, Teach Beyond is a global community providing transformational education services as part of God's ongoing mission to transform individuals and communities into all He intends.
Want to learn more and get involved? Visit teachbeyond.org or follow us on social media.
To help more people find the podcast and hear about Teach Beyond, we'd love it if you would leave a rating or review and share the show with a friend. Be sure you're subscribed or following the show on the platform where you listen so you never miss an episode.
And as always, you can reach us at podcast@teachbeyond.org. We'll see you next week.